On the day they distributed the millions, I was handed a single rusting key. My sister Sarah got the luxury penthouse in the city, my cousins divided the stock portfolios, and my mother Sandra claimed the family villa. I stood in the corner of the polished mahogany boardroom, my nurse's uniform still smelling faintly of lavender soap and disinfectant, holding a tarnished brass key that felt cold against my palm. Sarah looked at me, her designer handbag slung over her forearm, and let out a soft, mocking laugh. "Well, Clara," she whispered, loud enough for the lawyers to hear. "I guess grandfather finally realized what a glorified maid is actually worth." I didn't say a word. I didn't cry and I didn't scream. I just looked down at the key. They didn't know what I knew. They didn't know about the conversations grandfather Arthur and I had in the dead of night, when the rest of the world was asleep and his mind cleared from the fog of dementia. They thought they had won, that their years of ignoring him while I washed his sheets and fed him spoonfuls of soup had paid off in cold, hard cash. But they had no idea that this key was about to unlock a truth that would bring their entire empire of cards crashing down. For 6 years I was the invisible one. When grandfather Arthur's memory began to fade, the family suddenly became very busy. Sarah had her charity galas and her luxury travel blog. Mother had her bridge clubs and her wellness retreats. My cousins were always focused on their startups. Whenever the topic of grandfather's care came up, the family group chat would go completely silent. Then Mother would call me. "Clara, darling, you're a nurse, it's just natural for you to handle it. Besides, you don't have a family of your own to worry about." By family, she meant a rich husband. I was single, working double shifts at the county hospital, and apparently my time was considered free public property. I moved into the old farmhouse with grandfather. It was a drafty 2-story wooden structure built by my great-grandfather in the late 1940s. The paint was peeling, the pipes groaned like dying animals every time the water was turned on, and the basement was a dark, damp cavern of stone and earth. But it was grandfather's home, and he refused to leave it. The family didn't care about the house. To them it was an eyesore, a piece of useless land in a forgotten valley. They only cared about his bank accounts and the family business, a logistics company that my father had run into the ground before he passed, which grandfather had somehow saved with his own retirement savings. At first, grandfather's dementia was mild. He would forget where he put his glasses or tell the same story about his time in the Navy 3 times in an hour. But as the years went on, the fog rolled in thicker. There were nights when he would wake up screaming, convinced he was back on the destroyer in the Pacific, or days when he would look at me with blank, terrified eyes and ask who I was. I stayed. I sat by his bed during the fevers, I held his hand when the panic took over, and I learned to cook the soft, bland meals he could easily swallow. I remember one night in particular during the 3rd year of my stay. It was a freezing January night, and a blizzard was howling outside, rattling the loose wooden shutters of the farmhouse. Grandfather woke up at 3 in the morning. He was sitting straight up in bed, gasping for air, his forehead covered in cold sweat. He looked at me, but he didn't see his granddaughter Clara. He saw a young lieutenant on his old ship. "The boiler room is flooding," he screamed, his voice raw with terror. "We have to seal the hatch, Clara. If we don't, the whole ship goes down." I didn't try to argue with him. I didn't tell him he was in a warm bedroom in Ohio. Instead, I sat on the edge of the bed, took his cold, shaking hands in mine, and spoke in a calm, authoritative voice. "Lieutenant, the hatch is sealed. The crew is safe. The ship is holding steady. You can stand down." It took him 20 minutes of deep, ragged breathing to calm down, but eventually the terror in his eyes faded, replaced by a quiet, exhausted relief. He leaned back against the pillows, looked at me and whispered, "Thank you, Clara. You always stay at your post." Those were the moments that kept me going, the moments that made the exhaustion and the isolation bearable. To fully understand why I was willing to sacrifice my career, you have to go back to my childhood. When my father passed away, my mother Sandra was too consumed by her social status and her search for a wealthy second husband to pay much attention to Sarah and me. Sarah, being older and charismatic, quickly learned how to mirror mother's behavior, seeking validation through material success and social circles. But I was the quiet one, the child who preferred to spend hours in grandfather's garden, learning the names of the herbs and listening to his stories about the old days. Grandfather Arthur was my anchor. He was the one who taught me how to read, who showed me how to plant seeds and nurture them, and who listened to my dreams of becoming a nurse. When I got my acceptance letter to the nursing program, the family barely noticed. Sarah had just been accepted to a prestigious fashion design institute in Paris, and Mother held a grand dinner to celebrate. Grandfather, however, pulled me aside in the kitchen and handed me a small, leather-bound notebook. "Write down the stories of the people you heal, Clara," he told me, his eyes shining. "A good nurse doesn't just treat the body. She cares for the soul." That notebook became my most prized possession. So, when the doctor called me years later to tell me that grandfather was starting to show signs of cognitive decline, there was never a doubt in my mind. I packed my bags, left my studio apartment in the city, and moved to the farmhouse. The family visited exactly twice a year, Thanksgiving and grandfather's birthday. Those visits were always a masterclass in superficiality. Sarah would arrive in her clean white SUV, step gingerly over the gravel driveway as if it were a minefield, and spend 30 minutes taking selfies with grandfather for her social media. The captions were always full of emojis. "Cherishing every moment with my favorite guy. #family first, #blessed." Then, she would pull me aside and complain about the smell of the house or suggest we put him in a state-run facility. "Clara, it's just depressing coming here," she'd say, checking her reflection in the microwave door. "And honestly, you're letting yourself go. Look at your hands." My hands were dry, cracked from constant washing, chemical disinfectants, and the cold draft of the farmhouse. But I didn't care. I cared about the moments when grandfather's eyes would suddenly focus, the fog parting for just a few minutes, and he would look at me with absolute clarity. In those moments, he wasn't a patient. He was the wise, gentle man who had raised me after my father died. "Clara," he whispered to me one rainy Tuesday evening, about a year before he passed. He was sitting in his favorite armchair by the wood stove, his hand trembling as he reaching for mine. "They think I don't see them. They think because my mind wanders I don't know who they are when they look at me. They look at me like I'm already dead, Clara. They only see numbers. But I see you. I see what you've given up. I know you declined the promotion at the clinic in Chicago. I know you stayed here because of me." "I haven't given up anything, grandfather," I said, brushing a stray lock of white hair from his forehead. "I want to be here. Chicago can wait." "You're a good girl," he said, his voice cracking with emotion. "The old farmhouse. It's got deep roots. More than they think. When the time comes, they will try to take everything. They will think they have taken it all. They believe that wealth is only what is written in bank ledgers and stock tickers. But there are things they don't know. In the basement behind the third stone pillar from the coal chute, there is a loose block. The key is in my desk in the secret compartment behind the drawer. Don't let them see you take it. Don't sign anything they give you, Clara. Promise me." I promised him, though at the time, I thought it was just the rambling of a tired mind. I didn't care about inheritance. I only wanted him to be comfortable, to feel safe. But as the months wore on, I began to notice things. My mother Sandra started showing up more often, always with papers for grandfather to sign. She would bring him his favorite pastries, talk in a high-pitched, sweet voice, and then slide a document in front of him. "Just a routine update for the trust, Dad," she would say, guiding his hand toward the signature line. One afternoon, I walked into the living room just as she was guiding his hand toward the signature line. I stepped in immediately. "Mother, what is that?" I asked, taking the paper from the table. She glared at me, her sweet expression instantly vanishing. "It's family business, Clara. You don't need to concern yourself with it. Just go back to the kitchen or whatever it is you do. You're always hovering like a hawk." I read the paper anyway. It was a power of attorney transfer, giving Sandra full control over grandfather's personal bank accounts and the title of the farmhouse. I looked at grandfather. He was looking at the ceiling, humming a soft tune, completely unaware of what was happening. "I'm not letting him sign this, Mother," I said firmly. "Not while his doctor says he doesn't have the capacity to make these decisions. He doesn't even know what year it is today." Sandra stood up, her face flushing red under her makeup. "How dare you? I am his daughter. You are just a child we allowed to live here because you couldn't make it in the real world. You think you're special because you play martyr? You're nothing but a servant. I will remember this, Clara. I promise you when the time comes you won't get a single penny. We will make sure you are cast out of this family." She snatched the papers and stormed out, slamming the heavy wooden door so hard the glass panes rattled. That was the last time she visited him before he was hospitalized. About 4 months before he passed, my mother and sister took their campaign to a new level. They realized they couldn't get grandfather's signature while I was around, so they decided to target me at my workplace. One busy afternoon at the hospital, while I was in the middle of preparing an 4-drip for a patient, the receptionist paged me. "Clara, you have visitors in the lobby. They say it's a family emergency." My heart dropped. I thought grandfather had collapsed. I ran down the corridor, my heart hammering in my chest, only to find Sandra and Sarah sitting in the waiting area, sipping expensive lattes. "What happened?" I gasped out of breath. "Is grandfather okay?" Sandra looked at me coolly. "He's fine, Clara. Calm down. But we need to settle this matter of the farmhouse title. We've brought the corporate notary. If you sign this consent form acknowledging that the farmhouse is corporate property, we can arrange for a private nurse to take over for grandfather, and you can finally go back to your own life. We'll even pay you a bonus of $10,000. I looked at Sarah, who was smirking, holding a gold pen in her hand. The notary, a quiet man in a dark suit, stood behind them. "You came to my hospital for this?" I asked, my voice trembling with a mixture of anger and disbelief. "You lied and said it was an emergency?" "Well, it is an emergency for us," Sarah said, tapping her designer watch. "We have a developer waiting, and your stubbornness is holding up the entire deal. Do you have any idea how much money we are losing every week because you refuse to cooperate?" I took a step back. I looked at my mother, who had raised me, but who now looked at me with cold, calculating eyes. "I am not signing anything. Especially not here, and especially not under pressure. And if you ever come to my workplace again and lie about an emergency, I will have security escort you out." Sandra stood up, her lips pressed into a thin, angry line. "You are an ungrateful, spiteful girl, Clara. You think you are protecting him, but you are only protecting your own small, pathetic ego. We will make sure the board of directors cuts off the monthly stipend for his medical supplies. Let's see how well you care for him when you have to pay for his oxygen tanks out of your own pocket." They walked out, leaving me standing in the hospital lobby, my eyes stinging with tears. They actually did it. 2 weeks later, the corporate check for grandfather's medical supplies was canceled. I had to take on extra night shifts and borrow money from my retirement fund to cover the costs of his medication, his specialized diet, and the heating oil for the farmhouse. The cousins and aunts knew about this, but not a single one of them offered to help. They simply watched from a distance, waiting for me to break. But their greed didn't stop there. 2 weeks after they cut the medical stipend, they attempted a legal coup. They filed a petition with the county probate court, claiming that grandfather Arthur was being neglected and financially exploited by me, and that Sandra should be appointed as his emergency guardian. I remember the morning the social worker arrived at the farmhouse. She was a pleasant woman named Mrs. Gable, and she looked exhausted. I showed her around the house, showing her the clean kitchen, the pantry stocked with the specific foods grandfather needed, and the detailed logbook I kept of his medications, his vitals, and his doctor visits. When she saw grandfather, he was clean, dressed in his favorite flannel shirt, sitting by the wood stove. He looked up at her and said, "Clara takes good care of the ship, ma'am. Best officer on the crew. Mrs. Gable spent 2 hours reviewing my logs and talking with grandfather's physician. Before she left, she took my hands. "You are doing a wonderful job, Clara. I will write a report stating that this petition is completely without merit. But be careful. Whoever filed this is not looking out for his well-being. They are looking for a key." I thanked her, but inside I was shaking. My own mother and sister had tried to label me an abuser, just to get their hands on a property they didn't even understand. And then there was the visit from the developer himself. A man named Mr. Sterling, representing a large commercial real estate firm, pulled up in a massive luxury SUV one afternoon while I was hang-drying sheets in the yard. He was dressed in a tailored navy suit that looked completely out of place in our rural valley. He walked up to me with a polished, professional smile, holding a business card. "Miss Clara," he said, his voice smooth. "I've been in negotiations with your mother regarding this property, but she informed me that there are logistical difficulties. I wanted to speak to you directly. We are prepared to offer you a private cash payment of $75,000, completely separate from the estate settlement, if you will persuade your grandfather to sign the land release." I looked at his card, then back at his polished teeth. "Mr. Sterling, my grandfather is not signing anything. He does not wish to sell this land, and I will not help you exploit his condition." Sterling's smile faded, replaced by a cold corporate coldness. "Miss Clara, the highway bypass is coming through this valley whether you like it or not. The county will eventually condemn this property anyway. You can take the $75,000 now and walk away with your dignity, or you can watch the bulldozers take it for a fraction of the cost in court. Your mother and sister understand this. Why don't you?" I handed his card back to him. "Because some things are not for sale, Mr. Sterling. Good day." He shook his head, muttered something about stubborn fools, and drove away. 2 months later, grandfather's heart began to fail. We spent 3 weeks in the intensive care unit. The family showed up on the final day, only because the doctor told them it was the end. They stood around the bed like vultures, speaking in hushed, hurried whispers about the funeral arrangements and who would contact the estate lawyers. Sarah was on her phone, looking at luxury funeral packages, while Mother Sandra was already discussing the valuation of the logistics company with my uncle. Grandfather Arthur passed away quietly at 4:18 a.m. on a Thursday. I was holding his hand. The rest of the family had gone to the cafeteria to get coffee. When they returned and saw the flatline on the monitor, my mother shed a few tears. Sarah took a photo of their clasped hands for her blog, and then they left. I stayed to help the nurses wash his body and prepare him for the morgue. It was my final duty to the man who had loved me. The days immediately following his death were a blur of grief and quiet harassment. Before the body was even cold, Sandra and Sarah arrived at the farmhouse while I was sorting through grandfather's clothes to donate. They didn't knock, they just walked in. Sandra was carrying a clipboard, and Sarah immediately started looking through the dining room cabinets. "Where is the silver set, Clara?" she asked, sliding open a drawer. "And grandfather's Navy medals? Those have historical value. We need to inventory them for the estate." I stood up, holding a stack of shirts. "The funeral is tomorrow. Can we please wait until we've laid him to rest?" Sandra looked at me with cold impatience. "The world doesn't stop because you want to mourn, Clara. We have tax deadlines and company audits. Mr. Harrison is reading the will next week, and we want to ensure everything is accounted for. We also need you to vacate this house by the end of the month. We've already canceled the utilities starting next Friday." I stared at them, my heart breaking at their complete lack of humanity. "I am not leaving this house until the legal process is complete, and you have no right to touch anything here until the executor is formally named." Sandra stepped close to me, her voice a low, venomous whisper. "You think you are so clever, Clara, but you are nothing. You have no money, no leverage, and no friends. We will have the sheriff remove you if we must." They took a few antique porcelain plates and left, leaving the front door wide open to the freezing winter air. I sat on the floor of the empty hallway and wept, wondering how people could have so much venom in their veins. The funeral was a grand affair, paid for by the estate. The family put on a great show of grief, but their eyes were constantly scanning the crowd, checking who had attended. I sat in the back row wearing my simple dark coat, ignored by the long line of business associates and wealthy family friends. The day after the funeral, I went to visit Mr. Harrison at his private office. He was a kind, quiet man whose office smelled of old paper and leather. He poured me a cup of tea and looked at me over his spectacles. "Clara," he said, "the family has been calling my office hourly, demanding to see the will. I have refused to show it to them until the official reading. I want you to know that your grandfather was very careful. He loved you dearly and he saw what they were doing. He knew Sandra was trying to drain the company. He spent his final year of lucidity working with me to build a legal firewall around you. Do not let them frighten you. The law is on your side, and so am I." His words gave me a small ray of hope in the darkness. And then came the reading of the will. The lawyer, a stern man named Mr. Harrison who had represented grandfather for 30 years, sat at the head of the conference table. The room was packed with cousins, aunts, uncles, my sister, and my mother. I was seated at the very end of the table, almost as an afterthought. Mr. Harrison began reading. The distribution was systematic. The cousins received their trust funds. Sarah was awarded the city penthouse and a significant cash distribution. My mother Sandra received the family villa and the remaining shares of the logistics company. There were murmurs of satisfaction around the room. Finally, Mr. Harrison looked down at his papers, then looked up at me. His expression was unreadable. To my granddaughter Clara, he read, his voice clear and steady, who gave up her youth, her career advancement, and her comfort to care for me when everyone else turned away. To Clara, I leave the old farmhouse on Blackwood Road, along with all its contents, and the brass key hidden in the secret compartment of my writing desk. I leave her the ledger contained within, and the sole right to the property below. A heavy silence fell over the room. Then Sarah snickered. The farmhouse. Sarah laughed. The old dump that's falling apart? And a key? That's it? He left her a pile of rotting wood and a rusty key. Mother Sandra sighed, a fake expression of pity on her face. Well, Clara, we tried to warn you. You spent all those years playing nurse, and you ended up with a house that will cost more to demolish than the land is worth. But I suppose it fits you. You always did love old, broken things. You sacrificed your career for a pile of splinters. My cousins chuckled. The lawyer, Mr. Harrison, didn't say a word. He simply walked down the length of the table, stopped in front of me, and placed the brass key in my hand. He gave my hand a gentle squeeze. He knew what he was doing, Clara, Mr. Harrison whispered so only I could hear. Go to the house. Read the ledger. Don't let them intimidate you. I nodded, clutching the key tightly. The family left the office in a flurry of excitement, discussing their new fortunes. None of them offered me a ride. I took the bus back to the farmhouse. It was late afternoon when I arrived. The house felt empty, cold, and silent. The wind whistled through the gaps in the window frames, and the floorboards creaked under my feet as I walked to grandfather's bedroom. I found the writing desk. It was an antique secretary desk made of dark cherry wood. I pulled out the main drawer, just as grandfather had described, and felt along the back panel. My fingers found a small wooden latch. I pressed it, and a hidden panel slid open. Inside was a leather-bound ledger, thick and heavy, with grandfather's neat cursive writing on the cover. The foundation of Blackwood. I sat on the edge of the bed and opened the ledger. The first few pages were standard logs of farm expenses from decades ago. But as I flipped through, the entries changed. They became a daily journal, kept during the years of his illness. November 14, 2022, one entry read. Sandra came today. She brought papers again. She thinks I don't see the greed in her eyes. She spoke to me like I was a child, telling me to sign my name. I pretended to sleep. She took my gold watch from the nightstand instead. She doesn't know that the watch is nothing. She doesn't know what is buried beneath her feet. Clara washed my clothes today. She sang a song my mother used to sing. I must protect her. The farmhouse must be hers. The trust is already sealed. I have transferred the primary land title to the Blackwood Trust. The family thinks the trust is empty, but they don't know the property coordinates. Asterisk. I felt a tear slip down my cheek. I turned the pages. The diary entries became more detailed, describing financial transactions. Asterisk June 8, 2023. Sarah thinks she is clever. She and her mother have been taking money from the company's reserve account, routing it through offshore shell companies to fund their luxury lifestyles. They think the company's decline is due to bad market conditions. They don't know I have the bank statements, the transfer records, and the original audit report. I have kept them all in the foundation vault. The key is in my desk. If they try to force Clara out, she will have the ledger. She will have the key. She will have the power to destroy them or to save them. The choice must be hers. I pray she has the strength to stand up to them when the time comes. Asterisk. Asterisk October 22, 2023. My mind is getting harder to hold on to. The fog is thick today. I forgot Clara's name for a moment this morning, and the look of quiet pain in her eyes nearly broke my heart. She didn't complain. She just smiled and brought me my tea. I must write this down while I can still think. The developer, Mr. Sterling, called again. He offered $6.5 million for the Valley parcel. He wants to build the commercial hub here. The family is desperate to sell, but they don't own the land. The title is in the trust. I have hidden the trust documents, the signed developer offers, and the company audit in the basement vault. The vault is behind the third pillar. The combination is August 24th, 45, the date I married my beloved Eleanor. Clara, if you are reading this, forgive me for leaving this burden to you. But you are the only one I trust to do what is right. Asterisk. Asterisk January 4th, 2024. The family is pushing harder. Sandra is threatening to stop paying for my medical supplies if I don't sign the farmhouse transfer. They don't know I've already set up a secondary bank account with my lawyer, Mr. Harrison, to hold my personal savings. I have enough to pay for my care, but I want to see if Sandra will actually carry out her threat. If she does, she will prove to Harrison that she has no interest in my well-being, only in my property. This will make it impossible for them to contest the trust in court. Clara is working extra shifts at the hospital to buy my medicine. I saw her crying in the kitchen when she thought I was asleep. My poor brave Clara. Your sacrifices are not in vain. The foundation holds and so will you. Asterisk. My heart hammered against my ribs. A foundation vault? Bank statements of embezzlement? The combination to a safe? I stood up holding the ledger and the key. I walked down the narrow, creaking hallway to the kitchen, then opened the heavy wooden door that led to the basement. I flipped the switch, but the single dusty bulb barely cut through the darkness. I grabbed a flashlight from the kitchen drawer and went down the wooden steps, each one groaning under my weight. The basement was cold, smelling of damp earth and old stone. I walked past the rusted coal chute, my flashlight beam cutting through the cobwebs. I counted the stone pillars supporting the main floor joists. 1, 2, 3. I stopped in front of the third pillar. It was made of heavy, rough-cut gray stones held together by mortar that was crumbling to dust in some places. I pushed against the stones, my hands getting covered in white dust. Nothing moved. I began to tap the stones with the handle of the flashlight, listening for a change in sound. Most of the stones returned a dull, solid thud. But when I tapped a large, rectangular block near the base, the sound was hollow. I looked closer. The mortar around this particular stone was clean, as if it had been carefully scraped and replaced with a soft, clay-like mixture. I pulled my pocket knife from my jeans and began to scrape away the soft mortar. It took me 30 minutes of tedious work, my fingers aching from the cold and the pressure, but eventually the edges of the stone were free. I grabbed the sides of the block and pulled with all my strength. The stone shifted, sliding outward with a grinding sound, revealing a dark recess behind it. I shone the flashlight inside. Nestled in the cavity was a heavy steel lockbox. It was about the size of a shoebox, painted black with a solid brass lock on the front. It was heavy, covered in a thin layer of gray dust. I placed the box on a dusty wooden workbench. My hands were shaking as I pulled the brass key from my pocket. I inserted it into the lock. Fit perfectly. I turned it and with a heavy, satisfying click the lock gave way. I opened the lid. Inside the box were 3 thick folders. The first folder was labeled Blackwood Trust Title. I opened it and found the deed to the farmhouse, but it wasn't just for the house and the small yard. The deed covered over 100 acres of the surrounding valley. I gasped. The surrounding land was currently being developed for a major highway bypass and a commercial shopping center. The land value was astronomical. The second folder was labeled Logistics Audit. Sandra and Sarah. Inside were pages of bank transfers, certified bank statements, and a detailed forensic accounting report showing that my mother Sandra and sister Sarah had systematically embezzled over $4 million from the family logistics company over the last 5 years. They had falsified invoices, created fake shipping routes, and used the company's capital to buy Sarah's city penthouse and pay for Sandra's luxury lifestyle. The third folder contained a single handwritten letter addressed to me. My dearest Clara, the letter began. Asterisk, if you are reading this, I am gone. And the family has undoubtedly shown their true colors. They have likely taken the cash, the stocks, and the properties they believe are valuable, leaving you with what they think is a worthless piece of junk. They do not understand that the farmhouse is the anchor of this entire estate. The land surrounding this house is legally held by the Blackwood Trust, of which you are now the sole trustee and owner. The developer has already offered $6 million for the commercial rights, but I refused to sell. I wanted you to have the choice. Asterisk. More importantly, the documents in the second folder prove that Sandra and Sarah have committed severe financial crimes. They have ruined the logistics company and stolen from their own family members. I did not report them because I wanted to protect the family name while I was alive. But I will not let them destroy you. Use this information wisely, Clara. You do not need to seek revenge. The truth is a shield, not a sword. Use it to protect yourself and the people who deserve your care. I love you, grandfather. Asterisk. I sat on a wooden stool in the damp basement, holding the letter to my chest. The tears flowed freely now. He had protected me. Even when his mind was slipping away, he was building a fortress around me. I spent the next 3 days reading the ledger and organizing the documents. I didn't contact my family. I wanted to see what they would do. I didn't have to wait long. On Friday morning, a sleek black sedan pulled up the gravel driveway. I watched from the kitchen window as my sister Sarah and my mother Sandra stepped out. They were accompanied by a man in a sharp gray suit, carrying a leather briefcase. I opened the front door before they could knock. Sarah, I said quietly. What brings you here? Sandra didn't smile. She walked past me into the living room, followed by Sarah and the lawyer. We need to talk, Clara. This is Mr. Vance, the attorney for the logistics company. Please sit down, I said, remaining standing. Sarah looked around the room with disgust, refusing to sit on the old fabric sofa. I can't believe you're still living in this dump, Clara. It literally smells like old people. Anyway, we're here to resolve a minor issue. Grandfather's will was outdated. He left you this house, but the land it sits on is technically part of the family corporation's assets. We need you to sign a quitclaim deed to transfer the property back to the company, so we can finalize the sale of the land. Mr. Vance, the lawyer, stepped forward and opened his briefcase. He pulled out a stack of documents and placed them on the wooden dining table. Miss Clara, as your sister mentioned, this is a standard corporate restructuring document. By signing this, you will release any personal claim to the farmhouse and the surrounding acreage. In exchange, the corporation is willing to offer you a settlement of $50,000. It's a very generous offer, considering the state of the property. I looked at the documents on the table. $50,000? I asked softly. Yes, Sandra said, crossing her arms. It's more than enough for you to buy a nice little apartment in the suburbs. And frankly, you should be grateful. We could have contested the will and left you with nothing. Grandfather wasn't in his right mind when he wrote that final testament. Grandfather knew exactly what he was doing, I said, my voice calm and steady. Sarah rolled eyes. Oh, please, Clara. He didn't even know what year it was half the time. Look, we don't have all day. I have a flight to Aspen tomorrow, and Mom has a gallery opening. Just sign the papers so we can get this over with. I'm not signing anything, I said. Sandra's face darkened. Clara, don't be difficult. You've always had this holier-than-thou attitude, but you need to face reality. You're a nurse. You make pennies. This $50,000 is a gift. If you don't sign, we will tie this up in court for years. You can't afford a lawyer. We will take the house anyway, and you will end up with nothing. We will make your life a living hell. Is that a threat, Mother? I asked, looking her directly in the eyes. It's a fact, Sandra snapped. You don't belong in our world, Clara. You never did. You chose to stay here and rot with an old man, and now you have to live with the consequences. I took a deep breath. I reached into my pocket, pulled out the brass key, and placed it on the table next to their documents. What is that? Sarah asked, frowning. This is the key Grandfather left me, I said. The one you laughed at in the lawyer's office. I walked over to the kitchen counter, picked up the black steel lockbox and carried it to the table. I sat down, opened the box and pulled out the second folder, the one containing the forensic audit report. Mr. Vance, I said, addressing the lawyer. Are you familiar with the corporate account transfers for Blackwood Logistics over the last 5 years? The lawyer blinked, looking surprised. I handle the general corporate filings, yes. Why do you ask? I opened the folder and slid a copy of a certified bank statement across the table. It was a transfer of $450,000 from the company's reserve account to a shell company registered in Panama under the name SS Luxury Holdings. The authorized signature on the transfer was Sandra's. Sandra's face went pale. She reached for the paper, but I placed my hand over it. And this, I continued, sliding another document, is the registration document for SS Luxury Holdings. The sole owners are Sandra and Sarah Blackwood. Over the last 5 years there have been 24 similar transfers, totaling $4.2 million. All of them taken from the company's capital, which was funded by grandfather's personal savings to keep the logistics business afloat. Sarah gasped, her hands shaking. Where did you get this? This is private corporate data. Grandfather kept records, I said quietly. He knew about the embezzlement. He had an independent forensic audit done 2 years ago, when he noticed the company's reserves were disappearing. He didn't report you to the police because he wanted to protect the family name. He hoped you would stop. But you didn't. You kept taking more, buying designer bags and penthouse apartments while I was struggling to pay for grandfather's oxygen tanks. Mr. Vance, the lawyer, picked up the documents and scanned them quickly. His face turned from professional indifference to absolute horror. This is highly irregular. If these documents are authentic, this is grand larceny and corporate fraud. This goes far beyond a civil dispute. This is criminal. They are authentic, I said. They are certified by the bank and the accounting firm that conducted the audit. The originals are in a safe deposit box, along with the digital copies of the transfer logs. If you want to verify them, Mr. Vance, you can call the auditors listed on the cover sheet. Sandra stood up, her chair scraping loudly against the wooden floor. You can't prove anything. This is a fabrication. You're trying to blackmail us. We will destroy you in court. I'm not blackmailing anyone, I said, my voice remaining calm and even. I'm simply showing you what I have. If you contest grandfather's will, or if you attempt to take this farmhouse, I will hand this folder directly to the district attorney. I will also share it with the minor shareholders of the logistics company, who will undoubtedly sue you for every penny you have left. Sarah sank back into her seat, her face completely devoid of color. She looked at her mother, then at the lawyer, her lower lip trembling. Clara, please. You wouldn't do that. We're family. You can't put your own mother and sister in prison. Family. I looked at my sister. Where was the family when grandfather was screaming in the middle of the night because he was terrified of the dark? Where was the family when I had to work 3 consecutive shifts because we couldn't afford to pay for his medication and his insurance refused to cover it? Where were you when he died, Sarah? You were taking selfies for your blog. You cut off his medical funding just to force me to sign away his home. Sandra tried to speak, but her voice was a dry croak. She looked at the papers, then at the black steel box. Clara, what do you want? I want what grandfather wanted, I said. I want you to leave this property alone. The farmhouse and the surrounding land belong to the Blackwood Trust. I will not sell it to developers who want to turn this valley into a concrete parking lot. I will restore this house, and I will keep it as a sanctuary. And the logistics company? Mr. Vance asked quietly, his hands folded. My mother and sister will resign from the board of directors immediately, I said. They will surrender their shares to the company's treasury. The company will be restructured, and the money they stole will be repaid through the liquidation of their personal assets, including your penthouse, Sarah, and your villa, Mother. You will return what you took from the employees and the shareholders. No, Sarah cried, tears spilling over her mascara. Not my penthouse. I worked so hard for my brand. You can't do this to me. You bought that penthouse with stolen money, Sarah, I said. It was never yours. If you cooperate, I will not press charges. You can keep your freedom, but you will have to earn your own living from now on. That is my final offer. You have 24 hours to sign the resignation and transfer agreements. Sandra looked at me, her eyes filled with a mixture of rage and terror. She realized she had no cards left to play. The quiet nurse they had dismissed as a servant had just dismantled their lives with a single folder. She sank back into the chair, suddenly looking very old. "You're a monster," Sandra whispered. "No, Mother," I said gently. "I am just the granddaughter of Arthur Blackwood. And I am finally doing what is right." Mr. Vance stood up, closing his briefcase. "Mrs. Blackwood, Miss Sarah, I strongly advise you to accept these terms. If this goes to a criminal investigation, you will face significant prison time. The evidence here is absolute, and I cannot represent you if you choose to contest this." Without another word, the lawyer walked out of the house, his footsteps echoing on the porch. Sandra stood frozen for a moment, then grabbed her handbag and rushed after him, not looking back. Sarah followed, sobbing hysterically, her expensive shoes kicking up dust as she ran to the car. I stood on the porch watching their car disappear down the road. The dust settled, and the valley returned to its quiet, peaceful silence. The restructuring of the company took 6 months. Sandra and Sarah surrendered their shares and liquidated their luxury properties to pay back the debt. They moved into a small, rented apartment on the outskirts of the city. I heard they are both working regular jobs now. Sarah at a clothing boutique and Sandra as a receptionist. I do not hate them and I do not wish them harm. I hope that in time they will learn the value of a dollar earned through honest work, rather than stolen from the people who loved them. As for me, I stayed at the farmhouse. With the funds from the Blackwood Trust, I began the restoration. We replaced the old roof, fixed the creaking pipes, and painted the walls a warm, inviting white. I kept the old basement stone pillars exactly as they were. I still work as a nurse at the hospital, but now I only work the shifts I want. I have started a small community garden in the valley, a place where elderly people from the town can come to sit in the sun, plant flowers, and feel safe. We call it Eleanor's Haven, in memory of my grandmother. Today we have about 20 regular visitors. There's old Mr. Thomas, a retired postman whose wife passed away last year. He spends his mornings tending to the tomatoes and talking about his childhood. There's Mrs. Jenkins, who was a librarian for 40 years. She reads stories to the other seniors under the shade of our old oak tree. In their smiles and their quiet conversations, I see the spirit of Grandfather Arthur. I see the community he wanted to protect, the deep roots of this valley that he refused to let them destroy. We grow fresh heirloom tomatoes, sweet bell peppers, fragrant lavender, rows of rosemary, and tall golden sunflowers that bloom every summer, turning the entire valley into a sea of brilliant, glowing color. Some of the local school children have started coming on weekends to help pull weeds, water the flower beds, and listen to Mr. Thomas share his endless stories about the steam engines and the old railroad that used to run through the eastern edge of the forest. It has become a bridge between the past and the future, a living testament to the idea that love and care can restore even the most neglected ground. Sometimes, in the quiet evenings, I sit on the porch with a cup of tea, looking out over the green hills of the valley. I hold the brass key in my hand, feeling its weight. It reminds me that the most valuable things in this life are not the ones that glitter, but the ones that hold us steady when the storm comes. Grandfather Arthur taught me that, and I will never forget it. The old farmhouse still creaks in the wind, but it no longer sounds like it is falling apart. It sounds like it is breathing, alive and safe, holding the secrets of a man who loved me enough to build a foundation that could never be broken. And in the quiet of the night, when the wind blows down from the hills and whispers through the leaves of the old oak tree, I look at the key and I know that is more than enough.